Formula One's return to America after a 2-year absence was a huge success. Not only did it offer a brilliant Grand Prix, but it was one of the largest and most passionate crowds that has been seen in a post-pandemic world. In fact, it was the largest sporting event in the USA since the pandemic began, with 140,000 people in the crowd. This massive audience is a display of just how big the market for Formula One is in the USA, and why the sport's introducing more races in the country from next season. But for me, I think it would be awesome to see Formula One return to a circuit that it's raced at in the past, and a track which has a huge amount of motorsport history. So is it time for Formula One to return to Indianapolis? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Formula One's popularity in the USA. Formula One has seen a huge amount of growth in the last few years around the world. In 2020, the US audience grew despite the fact that none of the races were in their local time zone. So this shows that the sport is reaching a new audience in the United States in particular. In addition, through the pandemic, Formula One has seen huge amounts of growth on social media, thanks to the digitally focused approach from Liberty Media, as well as the fact that Formula One was one of the few sporting categories that found a way to successfully run through the pandemic. It saw a 99% year-on-year rise in social media engagement, which was more than double the next major league in terms of engagement growth. Then, you have the elephant in the room, which is Drive to Survive, the Netflix series that's taken the world by storm and brought a whole new audience to the sport. The show pulls back the curtain on a sport which is difficult to identify with the characters, and it dives into the thoughts and feelings of the drivers and team personnel. Yes, Drive to Survive over-dramatises some events, but it has unlocked a whole new audience, and through the pandemic, the number of Netflix subscribers with access to the show has been higher than ever. ESPN, the Formula One broadcaster in the US, has seen a 50% increase in viewership in 2021 alone, and this is in part due to the increase in the online presence, but primarily due to the fact that this season we've seen an almighty battle between Hamilton and Verstappen. What's for sure though is the fact that the USA is still a huge growth market for Formula One, and that's exactly what Liberty Media set out to achieve when they took over the running of the sport at the start of 2017. And this new audience has already seen a new Grand Prix arrive in the country for 2022, with the Miami Grand Prix making its debut. But given the huge size of the USA, surely it's deserving of more races, especially when you consider the fact that we have such a clustered group of races in Europe, and this is where the Indianapolis Motor Speedway comes to mind. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway has a huge amount of history. It's home to one of, if not the most iconic motorsport events in the world, the Indy 500, which represents 1/3 of the motorsport Triple Crown, alongside the Monaco Grand Prix and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. This track is a core part of motorsport history, and the infield road course layout of the track was host to Formula One racing between 2000 and 2007. The majority of the events hosted there were incredible to watch, with well over 100,000 fans at most of those Grand Prix. And the unique nature of the track, with a section of the circuit being on the main oval, is great to watch. Sure, it has some dreadful sections as well. The hideous chicane between turns 9 and 10 springs to mind as a horrendous piece of track design, separating the cars out just before they head out onto the curved banking section and onto the start-finish straight. But on the whole, the circuit was well received, with the race helping to increase the sport's presence in the US and in a city where there is so much love for motorsport. Now, over these 8 events, the circuit played host to not one, but 2 controversies, with an attempted photo finish gone wrong in 2002 and a farcical event with just 6 of the 20 cars running taking part in 2005. But before I take a look at those events, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. The reception to the last couple of videos has been absolutely incredible, and it would be awesome to reach 25,000 subscribers by the end of the season. Thanks. In 2002, Schumacher, having already won the championship, was comfortably leading from his teammate, Rubens Barrichello. But on the last lap, the champion slowed down, allowing the second Ferrari car to catch up and stage a photo finish. Seems like Barrichello didn't know the deal, and it was just a spur-of-the-moment decision from Schumacher, but it resulted in a win for the Brazilian driver as he crossed the line just 0.011 seconds ahead of his teammate. It was a controversial ending, and the closest finish that Formula One has seen since it introduced the timing to 1,000th of a second. Following the race, there were a number of theories as to why it was done. Earlier that year, Schumacher had been gifted a win by Barrichello in Austria in another controversial ending, so it's rumoured that he was just paying back the favour. But it didn't exactly look great to see a driver slowing down just before the finish line on purpose. But this minor controversy was nothing in comparison to the 2005 Grand Prix. The race, where just 6 of 20 cars took part, with these being the 2 Ferraris, Jordans and Minardis. It was caused by the tyre manufacturer Michelin, who provided 7 teams with tyres on the grid and determined that their compound was not safe on the high-speed banked final corner, and after a couple of high-speed blowouts on the longer runs, it was determined that they wouldn't be safe to run through a full 73-lap Grand Prix. And in 2005, it was part of the regulations that the teams would need to run the race on a single set of tyres, with pit stops only scheduled for refuelling. The manufacturer tried to send an alternative compound after analysing the results of some of the tyre failures in the practice sessions, but this was to no avail. Throughout the weekend, there was rumour and speculation about a proposed solution, and the teams came close to agreeing to install a new chicane to slow the cars down at the banking. And the idea of the teams with Michelin tyres pitting for new rubber every 10 laps was also tabled. But continually, it was the Ferrari team principal Jean Todt who was opposed to these ideas and blocked them from a unanimous vote required to make such changes so close to the race. Ultimately, the teams and the FIA failed to intervene in time, and so despite all cars lining up on the grid, the 14 cars at risk peeled off into the pits, leaving the 6 remaining challengers on the starting lineup, in what turned out to be one of the most farcical Grand Prix in the history of the sport. It was clearly an easy win for the Ferrari team, which was surrounded by the boos from the crowd throughout the race, and in the end, this was the USA Grand Prix's downfall. The attendance dropped in the 2 years following the race in 2005, which ultimately meant that the US Grand Prix was lost from the calendar until 2012. The track itself has been updated since the previous runnings of the event in the early 2000s, and what they've created is a circuit that isn't dependent on the banking, and the chicane at turns 9 and 10 have been removed. It's also worth noting that it could well be the case that the 2022 regulation changes mean it's more likely that the cars can follow each other easier in the future, and this could well mean that a race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway could well become one of the best on the calendar. The future of Formula 1 in the USA. Clearly, the future of Formula 1 has the United States as a key market, and Liberty Media are obviously achieving their goals in this department as the attendance at these races continues to grow. Formula 1 obviously has 2 races in the USA scheduled for next year, with the Miami Grand Prix and the race that's subject to contract at COTA, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for the USA to have 3 Grand Prix in the future. Even if Indianapolis, Miami and Austin all hosted a Grand Prix, they still wouldn't be the closest races on the calendar, given the condensed geography of the European leg of the season. So in the future, it seems like 3 races in the USA could be plausible, and in my opinion, I think this would be brilliant for the sport. And with Drive to Survive continuing for Season 4 off the track this season, and the success of the race in Austin this year, the sport is likely to continue to grow in the country. To increase the popularity further, the only thing that would be missing is an American driver. The last American to race in Formula 1 was Alexander Rossi in 2015, who raced for Marussia for a total of 5 Grand Prix. Prior to that, it was Scott Speed who raced for a season and a half in a Toro Rosso car, failing to score a point over his 28 races and losing his seat to a young Sebastian Vettel. And the last American to score a point in Formula 1 was Michael Andretti, all the way back in 1993, who scored 7 points for McLaren but failed to see out the season, having been comprehensively beaten by Ayrton Senna in the same car. Andretti had come across from IndyCar, where he'd won the championship in 1991, but was relatively disappointing in Formula 1, where he achieved just a single podium finish at his last race in Monza. So, it's been a long time since America had a driver compete in Formula 1, let alone score points, but this doesn't mean it couldn't happen. Colton Herta is a 21-year-old talent racing in IndyCar, and is the series' youngest ever winner after his victory at COTA in 2019, winning at the age of 18. But the important point to note is the fact that Herta came to Europe in the early part of his career. At the age of 15 in 2015, he raced in Formula 4, following this with a stint in a series of Formula 3 events in 2016. So this driver's goal was Formula 1 when he was younger. This year, Herta came 5th in IndyCar, and he has a very bright future in that category. For me, it wouldn't be worth him moving to Formula 1 unless he gets the opportunity to compete for a top team. And if he keeps up his performances and gets connected to one of the Formula 1 teams, we could well see him testing Formula 1 machinery in the not too distant future. For me, having 3 races in America isn't too many. The vast nature of the country, coupled with the millions of fans located there, means it wouldn't be too much in my opinion. It's important to strike the right balance as the interest could wane, but if the racing continues to be good and more fans are invited to the sport through the series such as Drives to Survive, then there's no reason why it couldn't be a success. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is a perfect circuit which is ready-made for Formula 1 and could well become a Formula 1 staple in the future. And if the country gets a new driver to root for who's competing for points in Formula 1, then it could well go from strength to strength. That's my view on the Indianapolis return for Formula 1. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and please consider leaving a like if you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.